I'm curious about North Carolina because I've heard some people question whether or not they can make the NCAA tournament, and I think actually it's a valid question. I think they will, but it's a valid question today since they really don't. I mean, Dayton is a decent win. I'm not knocking the win on a neutral floor over, a top 50-ish caliber team. But the 4 major conference teams they came up against, they got handled. And they came back against Kansas and made that a game, even took the lead. They didn't really against Auburn. They lost in overtime to Michigan State. I'm not really sure how good Michigan State is. And they got run by Alabama on their own floor. So I do have my concerns about UNC. They don't turn people over. They're not shooting the three well, and they don't really have a presence in the middle. How do you overcome those things?
Yeah, I'm not too worried about UNC, and I think this is definitely a NCAA tournament team. Let's revisit that topic in 4 weeks. Okay. And yeah, but some of the things you just pointed out, they can't solve. They can't just. Armando Bacot's not going to just reappear on the roster, right? So they don't really have an inside presence or a low post hub. They've got some good centers on the roster, like Washington and Claude and Lubin. All of those guys can do different things, and, do them pretty well. Jalen Withers can play some small ball 5 too and give some time at the 4. But name me another team that has more perimeter talent.
I'm with you.
The team does. R.J. Davis, amazing. Elliot Cadeau, not a good game against Alabama, but it's had a nice season. Seth Trimble's been probably the most improved player in the league thus far. Ian Jackson's looked awesome in recent games. Drake Powell was awesome against Alabama, and it kind of got lost because Alabama hit a bunch of threes and dunked the ball a lot. And guys who played well for UNC in that game maybe got lost in the shuffle a little bit. The defense is what it is. They're going to have to clean some stuff up. I thought their transition defense was bad against Alabama. And some of that is Bama's system and style and their talent, but I thought some of it was also UNC just not getting matched up where they needed to. And offensively, R.J. Davis is going to start making some threes here. He's due for one of those 5-game stretches where he makes 60% of his threes or whatever. So I get the concern. The record doesn't look very good right now, but let's get a few more weeks of data. I think this team's talent is too good for them to be even a bubble team. I think this is going to be a pretty solid postseason tournament team at UNC.
I don't disagree with that. And they are loaded in the backcourt and on the wings. I might have more concerns about what's happening in the middle. In terms of at center, with whether it's Washington or Lubin or Claude, I may have more concerns than you do, but you're certainly more of an expert about this than I am. And I'm also concerned because this team traditionally has relied on offensive rebounding, on good play in the pivot, and I'm not sure they're going to get it over the long haul. But in this league, and maybe the 4 power teams they played, I'm going to remove Michigan State out of it because, again, I'm not 100% sure that Michigan State is great. I just think that was a good basketball game by maybe 2 pretty evenly matched teams that Carolina lost in overtime. But those other games, Kansas, Auburn, Alabama, if you told me today that those were 3 of the 4 Final Four teams, I'd buy it. And I don't put North Carolina in that category. So I'm not completely surprised that they lost those 3 games. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think there have been people, just to look even at Duke, I think there have been people that have been concerned with some of the stuff they've done against very, very good competition this year too. And it's just, I don't know, I think with the smaller sample, it's a little easy to overreact. And then, I don't know, once the dust settles, I think the sort of talent rises up. So we just need more information with this team. But it's absolutely correct that there are concerns with the defense, and there are concerns in the middle that they just can't get. They're just not. They don't have a low post target on this team, or really a guy that's going to purely mash you on the offensive glass. They kind of whipped on finding one of those guys in the portal. But like all the three centers that they're using, Lubin, Washington, and Claude, like they're all like ACC rotation players. You know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, there's probably not a superstar, or maybe like a true defensive anchor or a low post hub, but all of those guys like can be on the floor and contribute too. So hopefully that's enough, I guess, for UNC around the excellent guard talent that they have.
Yeah, and I'm with you. RJ Davis probably isn't going to go 17 for his next 70 from 3-point range. Let me go to NC State.
Not.
Let me go to the Wolfpack, who beat Florida State in overtime and then beat Coppin State in the Heritage game at Reynolds Coliseum. I think it was probably a closer game than State fans wanted it to be. Regardless, to me, it's not a completely new roster, but there's a lot of new pieces, and certainly there are players in different roles. Michael O'Connell hasn't had the start to the season overall that he would like based on the way he finished last year. But so I think it's going to take some settling in. What are your thoughts on where the Wolfpack are through, 10 games of the season and heading to Kansas coming up tomorrow? That could be rude.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a little, it's worth pointing out. Kansas has lost 2 straight and didn't look particularly good against Creighton or Missouri. I watched the film of both of those games, and Kansas has some. We've talked about this a few times now, Gold. With Marcus Hill, sort of like the way teams will guard him as kind of a wing or a guard that doesn't shoot, from the perimeter all that well. Kansas has DeJuan Harris, who can make open catch and shoot threes, but is not like a pull-up shooter. They've got a guy like KJ Adams at the 4 that doesn't take shots outside of 15 feet. So you've seen some teams that they've played against that have thrown similar approaches at Kansas that we've seen some of the opponents throw at NC State this year. So they're not identical. Obviously, Kansas has more high-end talent and is an elite defensive team, but there's some pressure points for Kansas's offense that I think State could potentially take advantage of. A team like Missouri, the way they were able to turn Kansas over, State could get to that level of turnover rate
right
for Kansas's offense tomorrow, then maybe they can make it a little bit more of a game. Long term for State, they're kind of where I thought they would be. Right now they're I think they're top 75, top 80 team in terms of, Ken Pom or Bartorvik, looking at adjusted efficiency margin. That's kind of where I thought they would be. Ultimately, the half-court offense is going to have to get a little bit better. It'd be great if they could squeeze more out of Brandon Huntley Hatfield, just from a motor, energy perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But luckily they still have Ben Middlebrooks, and he's a very nice center. I think he has the chance to have if he can stay out of foul trouble, I think he has the chance to play very well at Kansas. But yeah, I think ultimately this is kind of where I expected them to be.
Brian Geisinger is joining us here on the Adam Gold Show. Let me just bring up one thing before we flip to Duke for a second, because I was curious how this was going to play out, and not only did the ACC go 2 for the SEC with just Clemson and Duke winning, but they were bad against the Southeastern Conference in games prior to the ACC SEC challenge. And then Miami went and lost to Tennessee, which is not a surprise because Tennessee is one of the best teams in the country, and Miami is not.
They're a mess.
Not one of the best teams.
I don't know if you've seen them play. They're a hot.
I have not.
They are a mess.
I've seen highlights of them, and we knew going into the season they were supposed to be good. It has not worked out that way.
No.
So I don't know if it was the disappointment of the Boozer twins declaring for Duke as opposed to going to Miami, because I know they were a finalist. So when you look at the net ratings, right now there are 6 ACC teams in the top 70. That's it. 6.
Mm-hmm.
3 of them are in the top 15, Duke, Pittsburgh, and Clemson. And the other 3 are between 40 and 60. I think whoever they are, Carolina, Louisville, and I think Stanford. are in the top. Maybe it's not Stanford, but I think there are 3 ACC teams like in the next group, which means that we have 18 basketball schools, and there are only going to be 6. If you're the road team, 6 quad 1 opportunities, and only 3 for home teams. So we're going to get to January, February, March, and that's going to be the narrative. And I'm not saying it to be critical of the narrative. I'm simply saying it's going to be very hard. You're going to have a great record, not a good record, a great conference record. If you don't have non-conference credentials to get into the tournament.
Am I crazy? It feels like that's been the same thing the last couple of years.
Yep. And last year was just 5 teams got in.
Yeah, and then it feels like on the flip side, in the postseason, the ACC has, the NCAA tournament has sort of like overperformed whatever those expectations are.
Yep.
It's sort of hard to push back against the narrative now because the ACC SEC challenge was pretty bloody,
Yep.
And I don't think the ACC outside of like Duke and Pitt and Clemson, big game against Memphis tomorrow. I don't think that any teams really covered themselves in glory. But you never know. Tomorrow's like a big opportunity. Maybe State looks competitive at Kansas. Maybe Clemson beats Memphis. Like all of a sudden, you start flipping some of these things around. But yeah, right now it's been a pretty rocky start, and it's gonna be tough because once you get into conference play, like the legal start, there's just not enough opportunities, especially compared to like what the Big Ten or especially the Big 12 will have, or the SEC, I guess, for that matter too, is going to have to sort of like boost resumes and stuff like that. So it's tough. It feels like the league is sort of like behind outside of maybe the high-end teams is like already behind the 8 ball.
Oh yeah, the cake's baked. The non-conference cake has been baked. There are certain things like, State's got this game against Kansas. Carolina's got Florida and UCLA coming. Duke will have Illinois on a neutral floor in the middle of the winter, basically. And I actually think Duke's non-conference credentials are bona fides now.
Oh yeah.
The 2 losses, Kansas and Kentucky, they could have easily been wins. And the win over Auburn, I'm almost as impressed bouncing back from that win with a win at Louisville, especially the way they did it. Let me ask you one quick thing about the Blue Devils. Isaiah Evans, is he going to be necessary for them? Because the intent was really not to play him much, if at all, based on their roster and their numbers. Injury aside, isn't Isaiah Evans kind of a necessary piece for them?
He's right on the cusp. It feels like it's one of those things, man. If he's gonna get in there and pop threes and make them at 40 whatever % rate, then yeah, he is a necessary player.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
You need guys like that on the court. And he's starting to, John Shire talks about this after every game. Like he's starting to like nail some of the small stuff from a defense and rebounding perspective too. He's skinny but obviously long, and he's like really like wants to get better. We're a year or 2 away from like really seeing what Duke has with him, but for him to be a microwave guy to come off the bench, and if that first shot goes in, like look out, he could make 4 of his next 5 or whatever after that. So I don't think to me he still feels like a little bit more luxury because we've seen the 8-man rotation that John Shire has played in other games that didn't include Isaiah Evans or Doeren Harris, but the way that Evans has played 2 of the last 3 games, especially, like he was excellent for them against UIW the other night too. So he's becoming a big piece for them. And yeah, especially if guys like Knipple is obviously such a dangerous shooter, but if he's shooting in the low to mid 30s or whatever, I think teams are still going to guard him tightly. But Duke does need a guy that can, fly around and play without the basketball and hit threes. So he's right on the cusp for me. But for now, it still feels like he's a little bit more luxury than necessity.
Man, they lose to Auburn, and they might have lost famously to the Tigers if it was not for Isaiah Evans.
6 threes, man, in a half. Like, it was insane. That was a iconic Cameron moment for him. Like, shout out. It was incredible to be there for that.
And the energy that he plays with, and I think he's got a quicker first step than anybody else they've got on the wing and all of that. So I'm more in the I think he's a necessity than he is a luxury, but
you might be right.
No,
So,
I'm not. This is not a. There's so much of where I think Duke can go that needs a little bit more explosion from the wing that they can't get out of their other, we'll just say 3 wing options. I guess Cooper Flagg is also a wing option. So he's got.
Depends how you define Sion James too.
I love Sion. You're right.
Good players. Yeah, I mean the team is loaded, man. Which again, this is why on the spectrum I'm probably a little bit more luxury, but the caveat with Harris and Evans was going to be if one of those guys is going to bomb threes this year, then they're playing themselves into the rotation, and I suppose by that, then they are a necessity,
Right.
But however you want to define it, he's been amazing, and really is turning into truly one of the top microwave bench scorers in the ACC, if not the country at the moment.
That's how I feel about you, Brian Geisinger. At bgeis_bird on Twitter. You can also find him on Blue Sky and check out Splitting the Action, the Substack, if you want to get smarter about basketball. Split the Action. I don't know. I'm making up all sorts of words and names here. Brian, I appreciate your time, man. Have a good weekend. We'll talk to you next week.
Yeah, talk soon, guys.
Peace.